So I think with almost 5 minutes gone, we can start. So I want to finally make a start. I want to welcome everyone here and also introduce people to GEC. This is our second webinar from the global energy community. We're glad that all of you joined, but also be aware that we're recording this and it will be published later on social media. So remember that you can check it later. GEC is a decentralized organization run by students and recent graduates, generally from technical backgrounds. And we aim to share all about energy and especially the newer renewable energy sources that can further our understanding, also for non-technical people, just as a society, in the wide society, sorry. So as I said, you can check the recording later, and I want to thank especially our guest today, Dimitris Symeonidis, for making tonight matter. He will carry us through today's topic, which, as you know, is the geoeconomics of green hydrogen and hydrogen supply chains, of course. With his experience and background in engineering applications and international policy advisory, I want to finally give him a thank you, welcome, and the spotlight.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you everyone for being here, and also the global energy community about the great work that you guys are doing with regards to helping students and young professionals in that field. My name is Dimitris Symeonidis, and yes, I work essentially in geopolitical risk and energy policy in various fields, from the energy market analysis to the geoeconomic effects of the energy transition, and also to youth mobilization as well, which is also a common ground, a ground that we share, because it's important to mobilize youth towards the energy transition and towards sustainability. So what we're going to talk about today is a more holistic approach to the energy transition, the transition towards green energy carriers. We're going to see why hydrogen is it's one of the most promising means to carry energy within the world as an alternative to the previous system dominated by oil and gas. But yeah, we're also going to see the challenges and the opportunities that exist given the right set of policy tools by the decision makers. So going through this journey, the first question that one might consider is, what is geoeconomics anyway? What do we mean by the geoeconomical dimension, and why should we care? Why is it so important to take this dimension into consideration? First of all, looking at the definition, it's essentially a set of geographical, and I would add to that, because we're talking about the energy sector, a set of geological factors that can give an edge in terms of economics for development, and of course for having a general increasing growth in a certain nation or in a certain set of nations that want to develop their energy policy. So it can be it can really be mostly talking about geology. It can be, for example, an oil reservoir that one might have, or a gas reservoir. But we are going to see that this edge can also exist in the energy transition as well, in the new energy systems that are going to be created. But let's take, let's say, a step back and see, first of all, why do we need the energy transition, so that we go and we see the components of the energy transition. Because to understand the components, we have to know what's wrong with the current system. So the current system is pretty much linear, first of all, and at the same time, it's creating a lot of emissions. And these emissions might seem benign on one's eye, but we see that time is running out, because it has multiple implications, many of which we see in our everyday lives. Over the past, let's say, last summer, we saw a devastating wildfires and droughts. We see malnutrition, we see effects on health, especially for countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, or in Asia in many countries. But this is exponentially affecting the rest of the population as well. So as we see, time is indeed running out. So we have to do something. And the solutions are many. As we can see, there are many solutions to decarbonize, to get rid of the emissions mainly. We could talk about, for example, the agri-foods chain. How can we reduce emissions from there? But the most important thing is the energy sector, because it is responsible for two-thirds of because it's responsible for two-thirds of the emissions at the moment. And that means that if we want to do huge impact, we have to address this problem. And the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, we can change the current energy sources with ones that do not emit anything. We see the solar and wind energy. But these two prevalent energy sources, they come with the most inherent challenge that cannot be addressed, is intermittency. In the night, we don't have electricity. So we have to think of ways to resolve this, because yeah, there is the lack of technology maturity as well. And one can think, okay, during the day I can have excess electricity, I can store it in the form of different means, or I can manage it. So we have energy storage and energy management as the possible solutions to that. And we have to think then, okay, we have these solutions, but how do we do that? There is the idea of energy management, but congestion is very difficult to tackle. So when we have too much sun or too much wind, there's so much electricity that it cannot really get managed within the grid at the moment. There might be a solution in the future, which involves many digital technologies and Web3, but at the moment we don't really see this as a chance. So then we have storage of electricity in the form of batteries, which is super expensive. And so that leaves us, there's very little, there are very few, signs that show that this price is going to be lowered. And the advocates of it, if you see at the moment, electricity companies that have in Europe that have streamlined battery purchase, they still cannot make many sales, because people, even with leasing, they can't really afford this, even in France, or in many cases in the Netherlands as well. So we are going towards liquid fuels, where we have synthetic fuels, but it's just like replacing, for example, gasoline with synthetic gasoline is not really solving too many issues, and it is also a very expensive process. Then the second one is to get rid of the carbon content and simply store it in the form of hydrogen, which is the reason why I'm saying this in the end, and why we need to care about the economics, because it has the biggest potential at the moment to become the dominant energy carrier, and that is why there is also this hype. This is basically the rationale. So now that we have clarified the situation of where is this energy transition heading towards, and why is hydrogen playing a huge role as an energy carrier, the other reason being that it can also be used to fuel, for example, to power fuel cells and to produce electricity again. So it's again within the electricity supply chains as well. So given also that as a given, as a fact, we have the following sentence, that basically it can become a dominant source of energy carrying within the grid. So taking this into consideration, this is a big statement, but it really can happen. It really can replace, to a large extent, oil and gas, also given that it can be used for decarbonizing the heavy industry, for example, the cement industry or the steel industry, which is already happening in Europe. So taking this into consideration, we have to start thinking of how is it going to replace this, because we're talking about replacing one supply chain with the other. So we start talking now about the geoeconomic or the techno-economic, the geotechno, let's say, economic characteristics of this supply chain. And starting with the similarities, so that we understand what are the main characteristics with regards to gas and oil, maybe, but mostly gas. We have the transferring methods that are very similar. Pipelines and shipping are the main sources. Trucks are not very economically profitable, so that is a very so it leaves us basically with pipelines and shipping. Of course, it will require a retrofitting process, which might cost, and in many cases it costs, because we have seen that. We have seen similar pilot projects. It can decarbonize the heavy industry, which it can replace basically applications that gas already exists. For example, the fertilizer industry, I didn't mention it, but it is also in a situation. And of course, the steel industry that I already talked about. This is also the reason that it can be used in similar sectors such as gas. So these are the similar things that make the hydrogen system, but there are many other technical differences. We have to, as I said, to be very, very careful with handling, because there is the explosivity factor, and also the hydrogen tanks have to have different characteristics. So we have to be careful of that, to be mindful of that. It has lower efficiencies, which makes it it's not so much of having lower efficiencies, but it can really not decarbonize all of the transport sectors. It's very difficult with light duty vehicles, even with heavy duty vehicles in some cases. So the retrofitting process, as I mentioned, it's not as easy as it sounds. So that these are the main technical differences. And now we have to consider also the economic differences that are expected to happen with such a shift. The first shift is from a univariable supply chain to a multivariable one. We're going to talk about this in much more detail, but before, just to give you an introductory, let's say, just to give you an introduction about this. Before that, we used to have the gas system or the oil system, where you used to drill, you have the energy source, you then transport it, and then it's the end of story. But with green hydrogen, you need to have the procurement of the materials to basically manufacture like the solar panels or the wind farms or even the biomass plants or anything that are going to produce the hydrogen, and then you need the materials for the hydrogen to be stored. So you understand that there are a lot within the procurement and a lot of variables within the supply chain, and all of these, they are being owned, or they have as main stakeholders, they have different main stakeholders. So we see that it becomes a game, a multi-stakeholder game. It's not just having the geological luck, let's say, but it also means having an industrial policy and being able to move forward with this industrial policy. I can use the example, we're going to talk about this later as well. I can use the example of Russia. Let's say that they used to have the gas, for example, but and they have the gas resources. But in this case, it's much, and you have the industrial policy that they have developed with regards to fertilizers, for example, which is an easy, let's say, processing technique. But now you have to develop processing techniques for the lithium that you have. You have to develop processing techniques for the nickel you might have in order to be able to use it. So it's much more complicated. It's not just having the let's say the resources and using them. So the second thing is a shift from the linear supply chain to a more circular one, because right now with the current pledges that each country gives, they need to make sustainable use of their materials, and will have to move to a more circular let's say supply chain. So this is also something that they need to develop, having a circular model and being able to support the circular model, which again involves many expenses, and it also involves many geoeconomic dimensions. And we have as I mentioned, the change of dependencies, because right now as I said before, if you had the resources, you could develop your own industrial policy. Now it's very difficult because you depend on the holders of other, let's say, resources. So it makes things much more complex. That also you can see that from the monetary policy, because if you could produce the energy source, you could just sell it, and it would just be the end of story. You could have a monetary policy that was very lax, so that your currency would be undervalued, so that you could be good at exports. But right now, with this future system, you do not care only about exports. You also care about imports. So you need to regulate your monetary policy much more in a much more sophisticated manner. Things are not going to be as simple as they used to be. So it makes a big connection between the energy sector and the finance sector. It makes it much more inherently connected. And you can see that with the stock market, which now you depend, like if you're a country and you want to develop your renewable energy policy, you have to look in the stock market for a series of materials. You don't have to look just for oil, for example. You have to look for the stock market with regards to lithium also, for example. So as this is going to be a journey, as every supply chain is a journey, and we have to see the geoeconomic factors in the form of a journey, let's make it in the form of different stops. So going into the first stop, let's say, of our journey, we see that the first thing that we need, as it makes total sense, of course, is the procurement of the materials, of the raw materials. And we're going to talk about this as even in the form of batteries, because of course this is also going to be important to address, but also for hydrogen. What kind of products are needed? Starting with the solar and wind hydrogen, which requires first of all silver. And we see that the demand for silver is so huge, and in my view, it's impossible to actually cover all of this demand for solar panels or for wind parks. So it's going to come down eventually to the few to the few, let's say, countries that manage to procure this in relatively good prices, because otherwise, with skyrocketing prices, you will the state will have to account for these increasing prices, probably via the form of subsidies, and this again is going to create a never-ending circle of inflation. So we have to be mindful of that. And the same goes for cobalt. The same goes, we mentioned lithium and nickel for batteries. It's again also cobalt. Which for cobalt, by the way, there has been this story that they are thinking even of mining undersea within the Pacific Islands, which are already in huge jeopardy because of the climate crisis. And there is this story that is being yeah, like, it's not really a story, but yeah, they are already contemplating on that. So of using cobalt even from the sea, of mining within from the sea, and that really shows how big the demand is going to be. Titanium is also in a similar situation. Going into biomass, you need to acquire the biomass, and then this brings us to we're going to mention also water. Maybe it's better to mention it now, because at the same time, for example, with the biomass, you need to have crops, or you need to have land. And for this land, probably you need water. But at the same time, you need water to produce the hydrogen. You need water for food crops irrigation. You need also to feed the people. So this creates a huge nexus, a huge challenge that very few have embarked on trying to resolve. The solution actually might be algal crops, but again, now going to the basically algae, like kelp, for example. But with that being said, it's again, as we mentioned, the geoeconomic side of this, because very few nations around the world have managed to develop marine crops supply, basically marine flora supply chains. So, for example, you see that in Japan, they had already developed this industry. Norway and Iceland, for example, Canada probably, but that's as far as this supply chain goes. Right now, they're trying to develop this through a policy, through significant industrial policies, other countries as well. But that's not an easy task to make. That requires really sophisticated policy tools. Going to pink hydrogen, you have the need for uranium or thorium, which is even more rare, and that again, and you also have the set of policies that are conflicting in countries. For example, you see France versus Germany. You see these conflicting views over nuclear. So that has also already developed into a debate between the two countries whether we can use pink hydrogen. And when you have gas, again, you need to, if we're going to talk about, let's say, blue hydrogen, not so green hydrogen, we have to consider if it is really, like we have to consider the carbon footprint, which again has to do with the pledges that each country has made. So this again goes down to policy, and we have to take that into consideration. Going towards the second stop, we have processing of the materials. And I would give an example right now. I don't have the graph, but I can give an example of lithium, because we all know that lithium is right now, basically the prices are skyrocketing. But as also it has been mentioned by Elon Musk, it's not about the procurement of the lithium per se. The lithium reserves are big, and you can find them in many countries. You can find them in Chile, in Indonesia. But if you go towards the processing of the lithium, then there is only one country that has the processing capacity, and that is China. So it's not as important to have the resources as it is to be able to develop an industrial policy around them. So if I manage to procure them in a cheap manner, and I have the capacity, or I build the capacity to process them, I will be much more successful than the one who owns the mines themselves. So that is something that for me, many countries in the global south need to develop, which is the industrial policies, and that is something that many of them are working towards that. So that is the most important thing, at least regarding the materials. And we can go further down the road, because even with hydrogen, you're going to need energy management, which means Web3 technologies, data analysis tools, data analytics tools, and that means having data centers, and that means being in a position to procure microchips. And this is again something that is being discussed as well very much, because the materials for microchips, they are also available they are also broadly available. But at the moment, we can see that apart from the Netherlands, Taiwan, and then we have the US and China, which are in a race for the microchips. There is no other country that can create that has this capacity to process them. So these are paramount. This is not just about our smartphones. This is about being able to control the energy management of the future energy transition. So that is really something that we need to take into account. Oh, wait. And after let's say after the processing of the materials, we have already the solar panels, and we have already the wind farms. We have, let's say, even the tanks and the fuel cells, and we can produce our own hydrogen. But then several questions exist with regards to solar and wind. Who has the land to produce all of these large volumes? Because it's also something we're talking about geoeconomics, and one of the geographical factors that makes a country is it's let's say the land, and how sparsely populated might the country be, so that we can install solar panels, or what other characteristics they might have. Because it's not about just sun. not about just land, I would say. An example of land could be Namibia, which has vast desert and basically untapped potential because it's very sparsely populated. That happens with a lot of countries in Africa. But that is not only a case. Then you have Chile, which follows a path closer, I guess, to the countries in the North Sea, because it has a lot of coastal, a huge coastline, one of the biggest in the world, and they can basically develop offshore parks. So that is also a potential, an untapped potential that they are actually exploiting. There are countries that might have a lot of sea, let's say, a lot of sea, a lot of huge coastline, and take advantage of it. But that again, that also goes with inherent challenges because a country that has a similar coastline to Chile's actually is so I'm going to now make the comparison so that you understand how other geographical factors might or other economic factors might collide. Then there is the example of Greece, which has a similar coastline, but you cannot really tap into this potential because there is also a booming tourism sector that you cannot really omit, especially if it is the backbone of the country's economy. And similarly, comparing, for example, Namibia to Mauritania or to Mali, like countries that are within the Sahara, it's not as easy to make the solar panels, to make a huge solar parks within the Sahara for two reasons. Because one is to produce the hydrogen, or even to cool off the solar panels, you need water, and you need clear water, like salt water. Even at the moment, it cannot really produce large volumes of hydrogen, so they don't really have this. And the second problem that exists is the exponentially higher temperatures that the solar panels get exposed to, which results to them degrading and becoming useless in a much quicker manner than, for example, in Namibia. So these are some things that we need to consider, other economic factors and other geographical factors with regards to solar and wind. Nuclear, first of all, we mentioned that it is recovering the uranium, being able to process it, the thorium, and then the technology to support this. And but traditionally, these kinds of units, at least until now, they come with huge costs. So it's not very easy to develop them with regards to finding investors or even the public sector to be able to invest in them. And so that really brings again many inherent challenges. So that's why we really don't see many, we don't see many nuclear power plants, especially in European countries, but in the global south as well. They're not very common. And with regards to gas, finally, there are most of the countries have made pledges either for 2050, 2060, 2070, maybe many of them. And if they don't really, if they don't find ways to produce, let's say, hydrogen from gas in a sustainable manner, then this becomes a very much debatable issue. Especially in Europe, it has received a very bad connotation, even if trying to use gas in a fully clean manner. That still creates a backlash, and especially with civil society. So the country that will be able to balance civil society's demands with the actual climate pledges, introducing innovative technology to take care of, let's say, gas leaks, which is one of the problems that exists, or in general issues with gas handling. This nation is going to be able to use it in a good manner, and there are many disparities with the ways that different countries use it. Actually, you can see that many of them have managed to install very successful carbon capture and storage or utilization units, and you see others that I remember, for example, the example of Turkmenistan, that they don't even practice the flaring technologies, so there are huge leaks that they should not be there. So that is something that we need to take into consideration as well. The fourth sector is the transportation one, and this is also very much of huge importance as well, even though it doesn't seem like it. First of all, if you are geoeconomically speaking, to make it as simple as possible, if you are close to energy hungry markets, then you're set, regardless of what other agreements happen. Because I'm going to give the example now of Chile again, which and of Colombia, which already have made some contracts and some agreements with the European Union, which is the example of a hungry market. And they, even though they have made this pledge, and even though some projects have started there, initiated there from firms and organizations from Europe, in my view, and as it seems as well, they are not going to have the priority as as suppliers of European markets. We see that there is a closer kind of collaboration with the Gulf states, closer collaboration with North Africa, because they're closer. They can find ways to transfer either electricity or hydrogen in a much more efficient manner, and the costs are going to be much lower. But again, this has as another variable. We mentioned that the variables are many, and one of them is the development of the shipping industry. The shipping industry is I think the key in developing also the energy transition, because first of all they're very demanding in terms of emissions, and second of all they can transfer as they can transfer large amounts of gas, and as they have supported the European Union currently in terms of securing their gas demands. They can also secure hydrogen demands if they are developed in an adequate manner. And at the same time, they can decarbonize an industry that is very, very difficult to decarbonize, which are ships. Many consider that even though despite all of the technological improvements, it will be very difficult to make shipping a competitive, let's say it's shipping as competitive as transferring through pipelines. But yeah, there have been ways that they have attempted to make it profitable. A country that has big stakes on that is Australia, because they have vast resources of solar and wind energy, and they have no place to channel their demand, because they're not so much a demand hungry country. And at the same time, they're not connected with anyone or with very few countries in the form of pipeline infrastructure. And hence, that's why it is of great interest to them, and it would be a great interest to them to actually develop this. And last but not least, the pipeline routes, they come also with geopolitical challenges. It's not just, for example, if there is an issue with a neighboring country, then your supply goes to waste, and then you have to find other ways to transport it. Whereas with shipping, it's not as difficult to change routes. With pipelines, if there is a breach of, let's say, of trust between two partners, then it's really the end of story. So each kind of transportation has their own inherent challenges. I don't mention trucks because I don't see them even remotely being a good source of transportation, because of the high costs, and because you need many trucks to transfer it. And I don't think there is this kind of capacity that we can develop, at least at the moment. And we're coming to let's say the penultimate stop, which is the storage sector. And there are two ways to kind of make this happen, because we're mentioning, of course, huge solar parks in the desert, but you can also have at a household level and store it. So let's see what are the advantages of each one. Regarding centralized, it's all good because you can create your own, because you can create a similar supply chain, like a very similar supply chain to that of oil and gas, and you don't have to care about many of the variables that we mentioned. But there is the issue to NIMBY issues, such as yeah, basically not in my backyard issues, because um, wherever you decide to develop this hydrogen storage unit, you're going to have to face backlashes, because everybody's going to be, why in why in my neighborhood, why in my city, and not in. So it increases the vulnerability to non-state actors, which again, it can really create issues with fear of being facing disruptions of production, and this actually creating a fear and instability within the economy, which is of course something that we don't really want. And in terms of decentralization, it really depends on the capacity building of the citizens, and on their will to adopt these measures. Then you have to consider, how am I going to incentivize them to install these units in their own backyard again. And this again will come down to financial incentivizing them, increasing the subsidization, and that again creates a circle of economic dependence on these exact financial policy and fiscal policy tools that are the same that have created this situation with the inflation in the first place. So there are these trade-offs that we need to take into consideration. Of course, the answer is, it depends. It's somewhere in the middle. It's this classic answer, because you really need both in order to accelerate the energy transition. But each one comes, as I mentioned, with these inherent challenges. And we go to the last stop, and basically the end users. And the first question that comes to mind is, how do you find them? How do you create the demand? Which is again, how do you incentivize them? How do I make someone use the hydrogen? So one way would be to yeah, again, to provide these fiscal tools, these fiscal policy tools, support them in the purchase of a hydrogen vehicle, or a heating system, help them retrofit their car into hydrogen, or their boiler into hydrogen. These are some ways to create demand. But then it's a matter of, how do you sustain it? How do you build trust with the citizens? And this again makes us understand that it's not just a matter about providing them with the fiscal tools to have this. We really need to make such businesses profitable, so that even the business people, the people that are going to trade these products, they are going to make profits. So this is how you sustain the demand, by making these products investable. And that is how we need to see this, because the issue is that so far with the energy transition, feed-in tariffs have been successful, but at the same time they create an economy that is dependent on these feed-in tariffs in the first place. So this is the situation again with the hydrogen economy. So we are trying to create a demand, but we need to kind of see this as a child, that at some point we need to let it look for subsidies. And the same goes, of course, for the citizens. We need to make it into a certain way so that we don't really require anything from in terms of feed-in tariffs, which at least especially for renewables, it's still the case. I don't know when it's going to stop, but yeah, hopefully it will be relatively soon. And coming towards the basically reflecting on these 6 steps, how does a country basically create a policy that can transform the economy? The end goal is to be able to create, first of all, a set of profitable businesses around the hydrogen economy, and potentially an industrial policy, so that with the tools that you get, with the materials that you get, you create your own production and you are self-sufficient and even export, or that you import in a very financially profitable prices. Starting with the first part, because essentially the market, the energy market, the energy stock market functions essentially like every market. Prices go up and down depending on the projected demand, depending on the projections that are being made, the so-called animal spirits. So you have to choose a set of diverse and stable partners to import or to trade basically hydrogen. So you have to choose them based on proximity, but also based on their inherent stability, see their capacity factors, see the technology that they own or they trade, and see basically where their production is heading, so that you make the wisest decisions. And I want to point out most of all the diversity in this, because if you have only one supplier, then you are in a very big risk of finding yourself under surprise, because if you are dependent only on one supplier, then yeah, if this supplier goes away, then there goes also your demand. And then also investments and, as I said, fiscal policies need to be targeted towards increasing specific and strategic demand in products and in production in general. The first one, to be able to thrive at least, is to invest in fuel cells and reducing the cost of fuel cells, which are still inherently high, so that you can actually, so that a state actor or basically a nation can have low costs on fuel cells, can have a good technology of fuel cells, so that they can also produce electricity out of the hydrogen. And then you have this, great convergence. You have green electricity, and then you can use it anywhere you might want. And then also these two sectors that seem that they are, they seem that they're not allies, they're rivals in the energy transition, but they are complementary, hydrogen and electricity. These two are going to align, and you will be able to use both in any sector you might want, based on your policy tools and based on the suitability of each. And then secondly, after the fuel cells, for me, this is the most important thing. Second thing is trying to reduce the cost in this order in cooling. I mean, cooling is actually, I should have put that for Africa and for in general for the global south, because especially in sub-Saharan Africa, cooling supply chains are the number one issue and priority, and should be. So that's why I put it first. But yeah, this really is country specific depending. But if we're talking about Africa, for example, cooling is the number one priority. And then for me, it's transportation and agriculture that we need to see more of. That we need to see more of the hydrogen that is going to be produced. And again, it's important to incorporate fiscal and monetary policies, policy tools, in order to drive and accelerate demand. But seeing the current situation, we have to always be careful of inflations and of macroeconomic consequences that our policies might have. We have to be able to continuously regulate these macroeconomic indicators, and that is why these fiscal and monetary tools are super important, are of uttermost importance, I would say. And based on that, as I said, the one who can create the industrial policy, like the best industrial policy, trying to cover as many aspects of the supply chain as possible, will be also the dominant player. And it might seem like many countries might feel helpless based on that, because they might not have the raw materials, but it's within their hand to either private or public state actors. They might they have other tools that they can harness. It might be the technology, it might be the workforce, very good scientists and technology with technology backgrounds that they can help. And if you are able to use these resources smartly across the supply chain, you can have a winner strategy, let's say. Um, and through this, of course, through all of this supply chain, one thing that I failed to mention as part of an economic stakeholder is the people that are going to exist, from the extraction industry up to the end use, up to the transportation. You have people everywhere, so you have to be mindful of that. And that is why the civil society has a key role to play, one of which is also you guys within GEC, and there are many other civil society actors that are working towards youth, or not only youth, but also energy workers for the environment and for the hydrogen economy. So let's starting from the first part. Decentralization of hydrogen is going to create hydrogen prosumers. These people, they need to know the economic background of hydrogen so that they are able to trade it. They also need to know the best practices of how you are going to deal with hydrogen in the first place, so that it doesn't blow up in their homes or anything. Also, as we mentioned, there are going to be professionals that are going to switch professions, and these people also need to be trained on how to use hydrogen in their everyday life. Uh, and going further down the road, we also need civil society to take care of the extractives industry. This has also been the case in oil and gas, that many countries in the global south, in many countries in the global south, we have seen human rights breaches. We have to avoid this, and we have to keep avoiding this. And again, the role of civil society is very important in making the supply chain just, also, not just geoeconomically, but also in the broader sense of justice. And again, the citizens are the most important, and the first ones that are going to be educated, or the first set of them that are going to be educated, which is connected again with the previous slide, they're going to have a winner strategy again. So civil society might not seem as a very important actor, but as you can see, they are very important also for the economy, because if you have many of them, most of the citizens that are economically aware of the benefits, this is going to create a booming hydrogen economy at the end of the day. So this is essentially the role of civil society. And having said that, by now I hope that you might have understood in general that it is a huge issue to create a thriving hydrogen economy. The geoeconomic actors play a major role, and each country and every country that is going to see these trade-offs, deal with them with specific policy tools, financially and legally speaking as well, and in a regulatory manner, is going to have in the end a booming industry. Thank you very much. This is what I had to say, at least about the geoeconomic factors. feel free to reach out and connect. Send me the questions either through email or through LinkedIn, or either right now, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Well, thank you a lot. I think this was a very good coverage. It really extensively covered the foundations because me personally, I wasn't too familiar about the whole ecosystem of hydrogen. So thank you for covering the bases so well. I do have one question. We can also open it for the audience, the whole floor, let's say. So feel free to open it up with taking care of the time, of course. But I have just one for now, if that's okay with you. But yeah, thank you for sharing your address as well. I think the one point that you discussed that really sparked curiosity in my brain was you talking about decentralized storage for hydrogen systems. It's interesting because, well, I never thought about it, but I also figured, do you think firstly, are there any proposed solutions to go over to get over the explosibility factor as well as the technical requirements and safety for having it decentralized? Like, does anything exist right now? And also the advice to like focus and improve down this road, or rather keep hydrogen for only industrial large scale applications, so more centralized solution.
Yeah, these are very good questions actually, and I would say that in terms of decentralized production, there have been some cases, at least in a pilot level. I mean, most of the cases of hydrogen innovations are still in their infancy anyway. There have been a lot of let's say a lot of math being done in terms of finances, and in some cases it has been profitable. It has been deemed as profitable um, through, for example, having a solar panel at the household level and being able to produce it. But the thing is, how do you create demand then for because and how do you make it attractive to the households that are going to use it? So that's why I mentioned that you have to create demand because comparing to having just a solar panel, you have many appliances that you can use them within your household. But with hydrogen, you have nothing. So that is in terms of that. In terms of explosibility, I think with the right framework, you can really it's not very difficult to store. Like the technical requirements will be easy to teach and to train, at least to the professionals. But then there is the issue of yeah, again, of how do you create demand. And with regards to the idea about the heavy industry, of course, these are the ideas of the European Union, at least at the European Union level. However, we have to take into account that it's in my view, at least in many countries of the European Union and in many countries in general, it's very difficult to create demand just from the heavy industry because many of them they are services based economies, so they don't have that much of industry to create demand. So if you want to create demand at the global scale, you have to consider a combination of heavy industry and household applications as well. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to have the hydrogen economy really thriving.
Yeah, that's clear. Thanks for the answer. I see Vivian. Please go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, also I want to say very much thank you. It was really interesting, and my field is not really hydrogen, but now I feel that I have a good overview of the value chain, which is amazing. Thanks. But my first question is much more general, and yeah, it is about where you can see the most potential of hydrogen. Is it for driving trucks, or is it more in industry, or do you see it more in private household as a replacement of gas? I'm more curious about what is the potential for it in your eyes?
That is also a very good question, and indeed, it is something that many people have been contemplating about how it will actually unfold and what is it going to cover. There are many, like the proponents of batteries and of just sheer electrification, that believe that it has no place that it can fit. In my view, of course, first of all, we have the agriculture industry, which is a huge one, and this cannot get decarbonized without hydrogen. You can't really throw electricity at plants and wait for them to grow. So you really need ammonia there. So you need hydrogen, and then apart from that. I still believe that heavy duty vehicles, despite the evolution of the BEV trucks, I still believe that with the batteries that exist, and with the progress that is made, it's almost impossible. I think that that trucks are still going to be are still going to be run on hydrogen at the end of the day. The shipping industry is a very important one. Again, I believe it's going to be powered by hydrogen. Already, many of the trials have been successful towards that direction. And as I mentioned, you have the heavy industry that again is very difficult to decarbonize otherwise, which includes steel, which includes cement, which again going towards the agri-food industry is um, how's it called? Yeah, it's the fertilizer, the fertilizer industry. And from household applications, I would say that one sector, that's why I mentioned it a lot of times. One sector that is that carries a lot of potential is the cooling sector, because we haven't found any solutions yet. And I'm mentioning it a lot of times because right now, with the pandemic, at least, we have seen this so widely in Africa, for example, that we need to have a cool supply chain so that we transfer also pharmaceuticals, and also this will enhance food security. So we need to try it, and I believe that it's something that will be successful, and that not many people have talked about it at the moment, and it has a lot of potential. Apart from that, I would say in the rest, like light duty vehicles and household appliances in general, I find it difficult to see some progress in that. I think there the electrification of the grid of the whole sector has won, let's say, already. So that is a little bit about how I see things.
Thank you. Probably this is too much for now, but there's one point I didn't catch is with agriculture. What is what is the connection between ammonia and hydrogen? Maybe you can say it really short, then I will catch up with my own research, because probably this topic is big enough.
Yeah, it's really that basically for ammonia from the chemical reaction you need nitrates, and then you need hydrogen, which nitrates you can really get anywhere in the atmosphere as well. It's not that difficult to grasp, and then you have the hydrogen. So there have been attempts to create green ammonia, which is the ammonia from hydrogen that is green hydrogen and with nitrates. And that is the main that is a huge problem, because it is a very emittive industry. It involves making food which is like you can't really take off the agriculture industry. So that's why they see promising future with regards to green ammonia, at least. And of course, green ammonia can also function as a transport fuel for ships, but that doesn't carry too much potential. I don't, yeah, like not too much, at least.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Interesting. I was looking if someone has one last question, maybe. Feel free to put your hand up or just open your mic. That's fine. Maybe not now.
Sorry, I have a question, if
Yes.
that is okay. Okay, thank you, Dimitris, again for the lectures. And my question is looking at green hydrogen, you know, being sourced from water through electrolysis, and then knowing fully well that there's at least there's water available, you know, all across the globe. So I ask, why would countries want, especially in the West, why would they be looking for, you know, other countries to import hydrogen from? Why not, you know, produce it from water that is immediately available within their, you know, surroundings or environment?
That is, yeah, that is actually a great question, and indeed, it's something that, yeah, it raises again a lot of questions, like why tend to import again hydrogen. Before let's say the energy transition, Europe was not endowed with as much oil and gas that would cover its own demand. Now the problem is not so much water as it is that Europe is a very densely populated continent. So there is really not a lot of land to develop large, let's say, a lot of solar parks, or there is the idea that we can harness the North Sea with offshore wind power, but again, I don't think that this can cover all of the demand that Europe has. That's why we tend to import from countries that have a big amount of land, and they can also have the water to produce hydrogen. But my personal view, if you're asking, of course, is that these countries, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa or in Asia, they should first cover their own demands with this hydrogen and then export. That is the main that should be the main priority for them, and that is the right thing to do. They should first of all think about their own count, like their own citizens, let's say, in their own economic development, and then export. So yeah, but the idea is that we don't have the land to develop all of this solar and wind power.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
See. I mean, speaking personally, I would have more questions, but I think we should respect everyone's time. Okay, if there are no further burning questions, I will then close. Thank you so much for your attention and also for your time, Dimitris. That was very kind of you. Don't forget, people, audience, to check us on social media and also to receive the link that we'll be publishing if you want to get back to the material. So yeah, I hope we can do more collaborations with you, and otherwise have a nice evening or afternoon, depending where you are. But yes, thank you very much.
Thank you also, Anna, and thank you everyone for being here. And I hope, yeah, next time we can dive deeper into the hydrogen economy world together.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend, you all. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
You guys.